Welcome to another insightful episode of The Communicative Leader. I'm your host, Dr. Leah O, and today we're thrilled to introduce you to Stephanie Craig, a renowned crisis expert who has guided world leaders and top organizations through their most challenging moments. As the president of Kith Consulting, Stephanie brings a wealth of experience from the realms of politics, media, and business to the art of crisis management and organizational resilience. Stephanie's unique blend of strategic communication and reputation management has helped her build a stellar reputation as she mitigates crises, repairs reputations, and fortifies organizations against future challenges. Her impressive career includes working with distinguished figures like former First Lady Rosalind Carter in influential Fortune 500 companies, offering her unparalleled insights into the dynamics of very high-stakes situations. In today's episode, we're going to delve into crucial topics such as the core principles of crisis management, the role of communication during turbulent times, and how leaders can build resilient, crisis-ready teams. Stephanie shares her strategies for safeguarding your organization's reputation and overcoming vulnerabilities that a lot of times we tend to overlook. So if you are eager to learn how to steer your organization through these stormy seas and emerge even stronger, this episode is packed with expert advice and practical strategies to enhance your crisis readiness and solidify your leadership effectiveness. Let's have some fun. Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Welcome, Stephanie. I'm so excited to have you on The Communicative Leader. And before we begin our conversation, I was hoping you could share a little bit about your journey. So you've been in politics, media, and business. You're a crisis expert and president of Kith Consulting. So just give us a little bit of that pathway.
Well, Leah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. I think the whole story of how I got here starts a long time ago, and I can literally say a land far away. I was born in the Canadian Arctic. My father was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, you know, those guys with the hats and the red jackets.
Yeah.
And so, my mom used to say that I've been through every natural disaster, except a tsunami. And I definitely choose not to cross that one off the list.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't want that one. But also I come from a line of people that find calm in chaos. My grandfather was in World War II at Normandy. My dad, as I mentioned, was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer who specialized in hostage negotiation. Lovely thing to emulate, really not appreciative as a teenager. But really, I always, even as a kid, found a calming sense of being in the middle of chaos. Excuse me, Leah. And I graduated from college in the middle of a 500-year flood.
Oh.
It was literally the largest, up until Hurricane Katrina, it was the largest evacuation in the U.S. since the Civil War. Wow. And so, just really found myself in a calm spot, being able to just help folks and do what we needed to do. And that just led me into a career in politics, which helped me refine this real desire to take control. And I freely admit that I am a control freak, and that it has served me well. And so being in politics, it really helped me learn from people that knew how to adapt. And in crisis, that is something that we try to impart upon our clients, is when they're in a crisis, teach them how to adapt. Our preferred way of working with people, honestly, is to teach them how to mitigate a crisis, how to spot a crisis, and how to recover from one faster. So being able to teach folks how to adapt and how to structure themselves in a way that makes all of those things easier, something I learned through politics. Also learned a real hard work ethic
Mm-hmm.
that I have loved and have taken with me everywhere, and have through my first part of my life, I got to see almost all of Canada. And then
Mm.
my political life has taken me across the United States to so many neat and wonderful places. And each time I've learned a little bit more about a region, I've learned a little bit more about industry, which crisis management itself is agnostic, but it's really helpful to be that old adage, an inch deep and a mile wide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is a fascinating story, Stephanie. And it makes sense, and I'm sure positions you perfectly to be a guide during crisis and before in the coaching and afterwards.
Absolutely. Uh, I think that's something that folks expect you not to be able to. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
special. You
Yep.
know, we might have a data breach. Well, unless you're a data breach expert and you have one, no
Yeah.
one's going to be an expert in data breach. So part of the nice thing about the way I've built my career and my life,
Mm-hmm.
I love people. I find people fascinating, and I
Mm-hmm.
like to collect them. And so
Mm-hmm.
in my world, I have a few people that are data breach experts.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I don't have to be a data breach expert. I just have to know one.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It reminds my spouse is like, I don't need to know what our calendar is. You know what it is, right?
Mhm.
Like when you have those connections, it really can make you
Absolutely.
good. Yeah. So let's think about some high stakes leadership. And I know, Stephanie, you have guided many prominent figures and organizations through really challenging situations. And I was hoping you could share one of these high stakes situations that really impacted or otherwise shaped your personal approach to crisis management.
Uh, it's not been one particular issue. As I mentioned, there was
Mhm.
the flood, and then there's been some other very high stakes issues that we've encountered, and some that stick more with me are the ones that impact people.
Mhm.
And through it's something that is not very. I guess the word I'm looking for is folks don't think that these people exist anymore, but I've made it a big priority to work for people in politics that I believed in.
Mhm.
And one instance in particular, and it was a long crisis situation, was I was an advisor to the mayor of San Jose, California during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And we were charged with, how are we going to take, because San Jose is considered basically the capital of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And it was so high homelessness population.
Yep.
Housing is expensive, and we really knew two things: we had to serve people, and we had the talent in our own backyard to be
Mhm.
innovative. And so those kind of crisis situations, while long term, and that's something people don't really
Mhm.
grasp, Leah, is that crisis there are some crises that are contained, and
Yep.
you can be like, done, I'm moving on.
Yep.
And others are a very long tail.
Mhm.
And that's why I choose this one to talk about.
Mhm.
There are some very sexy ones where, we were on the front page of every newspaper in the world. And that's honestly when somebody called us too late. If you call us
Yeah.
beforehand, we can
Yeah.
do everything we can to keep you off the front page.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. This
and
was not the
so
goal.
exactly. That's when it's too late.
Mhm.
You call us, we can help,
Yeah.
but we prefer to help
Mhm.
earlier. But the reason I talk about that one is there were the kind of adage in Silicon Valley is they kind of got the idea that COVID was coming a little bit earlier than other folks.
Okay.
And so they started really planning and
Mhm.
figuring out, and it ended up with something very revolutionary. It was called the Silicon Valley Recovery Council, and it had some of the most prominent
Mhm.
names in tech
Mm.
gathering to create a plan to support the community.
Mhm.
And that to me is a really good example
Yeah.
of, what you need to do, you figure out what resources you need to
Mhm.
make an impact,
Yep.
and then you go to work.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and think about all of the leadership at every level there in planning ahead of time and making sure the right people are at the
Mhm.
table And I love too that you started that by talking about how do we serve those around us. I mean,
Mhm.
what a profound example, and what an incredible thing to be a part of. I mean, no one was excited about COVID, especially when there were so many unknowns, but to be able to be in a position to help lessen it and make it better for your community, really, really
Absolutely.
powerful.
And the thing about that was interesting is that the right communicating to so many different groups of people, business leaders,
Yep.
community leaders, average citizens, business folks that were worrying about the survivability of their own business.
Yeah.
It required a lot of nuanced communicating
Mm-hmm.
and understanding what, not changing what we said, but changing how the message was delivered so
Yep.
very specific groups would hear what we had to say. And Sam, the mayor who's now in Congress and one of my favorite people, um, he's a very plain spoken person, and getting those nuances is important. And he was very good at it, and it made our job a lot easier. Because he understood frequency, he understood tone, he understood audience. And when you are trying to make people understand that, you know what, we're doing everything we can and we have hope that this is going to work,
Yep.
I think communication is just critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said too, I think so many people think, well, I've posted it or I hit send. So they're done.
Right.
Communication has occurred. But if the message isn't framed in a way where people are going to listen to it, doesn't matter.
Well, and that's something that we talk about in client preparation is we have a formula, and it's called clarity plus trust equals speed. And we actually say
I like
strategic
that.
speed,
Right.
because speed for speed's sake ends up in the ditch.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And so it's clarity of what matters, who matters to you, what matters to them, and how they communicate.
Yeah.
So understanding who your greatest stakeholders are, and like deeply understanding. Not saying our customers, but what are your customers' value? Who do they trust to get information? Where do they get information from? If you're not 40 some years old, you're likely not on Facebook.
Yep. Yep.
So if you have a really young audience,
Yeah.
that's not how to be communicating.
Yeah.
And so understanding who they are, clarity in who, what, where, all of that, and then building the trust with them. Communicating in the places where they need you to communicate in a way that they need you to communicate so they'll hear you. That's key insulation for crisis, because when something happens, if you've taken that time to build the trust, get to know them, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
So clarity on that, trust in the people, the procedures and the policies. Everybody knows what they're doing. They know what the chain of command is, and they know, what our policy is on, like, back to data breach. They know what our policy is on
Yeah.
data breach.
Yep.
And so clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. And
Oh yeah.
strategic speed comes from having all of those things answered, and ability to go forward fast.
Yeah, exactly. When you're not in a state of crisis, when you are
Right.
thinking clearly and have time to workshop that.
Absolutely. And make decisions that can be made ahead of time. There's
Yeah.
no need. Let's just be honest. There are very few people in this world that like to have their hair on fire. I am one of them,
Yep.
but I don't recommend it.
Yeah. Yep.
So make those decisions
Oh, I
ahead
love
of
it.
time.
Yeah,
Figure out who your
exactly.
stakeholders are.
Yep. So, Stephanie, you just kind of shared some core principles with us as clarity and trust equals strategic speed. And I love that. And I'm wondering, with that, are there other core principles that you believe are essential to maintaining organizational stability and resilience, especially during crisis? And I'm wondering, too, if these principles, do they hold true if you have a really high profile individual and an organization, or do they change a little bit if it's, if you're talking about a political figure or a large organization?
I think I would go back to those two things. The clarity and the trust equals speed. Uh, and the reason that I say that they're not any grand principles is because you should be, as an organization and an individual, driven by your values.
Yep.
And it's not up to us to tell you what your values are. It's up to us to lead you through an exercise that makes sure you know what your values are. And then have those values weave their way through everything that people do. And from an organization standpoint, that means if you have a value of honesty and transparency, okay, is your pay honest and transparent? Is your board honest and transparent? Is the language of honesty and transparency in your evaluations, in your job postings, in your internal newsletters, in your board report? So it's more an idea of helping people figure out what the principles are for them.
Yep.
Than us imparting them upon. And that actually, for an entire organization, that serves as a touchstone.
Yep.
Both in a crisis and also in trying to spot and mitigate a crisis. Because if you see someone acting in a way or a policy that's contravening to those values that you know to be true, that you all have adopted, that friction inevitably is going to lead to smoke and likely to fire. And so when we talk about resilience and principles around resiliency, the idea of preparation is critically important there. Because it gives people the confidence that they know where they stand. They know what values they're standing on. They know what to do. And so it's that confidence that we try to impart by the preparation. And I think the other one I would probably add is mindset. There are two ways you can look at this. You can be okay, I want to plan for this. I want to invest in planning for this. I want to walk through my really bad days so they aren't really bad when I get here. Or I don't think anything bad is ever going to happen to me and I'm going to stick my head in the sand. Those people usually are the ones that end up on the front page of every newspaper in the world. And so to me, that actually the way we employ this with leaders is, I was a competitive figure skater as a kid.
Okay.
I think every kid in Canada is either a hockey player or a figure skater.
Figure skater. Yep.
Yeah, and soccer is becoming a very, very close third, I think. But one thing that my coach used to, I was a very young competitive. I turned competitive at like 10.
Okay.
And so they figured out really fast, though, that if I mentally walked through my routine, I would be able to understand. I had to understand what the whole thing would look like. And then I would mentally keep walking through it, keep practicing it in my mind, and then practicing it and I have honestly, Leah, used that throughout my entire life. Both of my parents have passed away in almost very close succession to one another.
I'm sorry.
But thank you. But it's very interesting. Everyone's like, okay, you're not as upset as I would have, because I was very close to them, as I would have expected you to be. And I said, because I wasn't surprised by anything. I mentally walked through and I started to deal with those emotions prior to having experienced them. I don't recommend having to do that. Everybody at some point in their life will have to do that. But for me, it very much helped me get through some emotions that I knew I would have to deal with in the time. And that's for some folks, these reputational, organizational crises are their worst professional days. And I guarantee you will not go through your career without having one. So walking through those bad days, and that's what we do in asking you to prepare. Okay, what does that bad day look like? Where are you going to stumble? How are you going to work through that stumble? And that mindset is critically important to wanting to be aware. And I think that leads, that desire to build a resilient organization by looking at the problem inspires confidence.
Yeah.
Because you have to invest in preparation. You have to invest in the infrastructure. One of the things that we constantly talk about, and I think I told you earlier, we're management consultants that speak communicator,
Yes.
and we inevitably the organizations that have the most challenges, ones that don't have communicators at their leadership table.
Yep.
And
Here, here.
so, yep. And because
Couldn't
it's
agree with you
honestly
more. Yes.
naturally what we do. It is
Yep.
we are the people that look around corners. We are the people
Yep.
that say, this is what could happen. It's our natural inclination to work through those bad days. So for most leaders, I say, take a page out of your communicator's book.
Yes, yes, I love that. And you're right, there's so much. So when I did my master's, my PhD, I worked in public relations, and I was in crisis communication for a little bit in a healthcare setting. And our first big crisis, so I did a lot of the work because I was an academic studying with a PhD and had communication background. But so much you don't plan for. And even like I realized I had to learn how to control my voice because I was nervous and I was recording these messages. I'm like, nope, record again.
Yep.
I could not provoke more fear through my shaky voice. But you're right. And for me, I did not like looking around the corner. I'm like, I can do this, but it is, the mantra of plan for the worst, expect the best. And that is really challenging. And that's why I really want to raise up what you and your colleagues do, because that is not easy work. It is not an easy way to go about life when you're always essentially looking for the exit. Like what's going to happen? What is this plan? What is next? So thank you for doing that and for doing it so well.
Well, we are the least fun at parties. We're usually standing in a corner. But it is, I think it's interesting to me. When I was much younger in my career, I couldn't understand why people didn't love this. And why it was really why I was attracted to campaigns, because it was fast and it was energizing and you worked 60 days straight, maybe longer.
Yeah.
And now I look back and it's not an average skill set and it's not an average personality to, I shouldn't say average. It's not a common.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and I have great respect for other people that have, I'm a judge. I think this is the third time I've been a judge for the PR week.
Okay.
Gosh, what are they called? The Do Good Awards. What do we call those? Anyways, and to look through those entries and see how creative people are. We are not creative. That's not our job. It's our job to make sure that things calm down and things can get back to business. But there's a deep appreciation for communicators who don't do what we do, who do the good stories, who do the good storytelling. And that these are important mixes. And I think they're nuances that aren't really truly understood by the C-suite.
Oh, completely agree. Completely agree. It's like, oh, you're all just communication, all the same. So let's think a little bit more about the role of communication in crisis. And I'm wondering, and in your experience, if you could walk us through, what does effective communication look like in managing a crisis well? And then the second part, what are some of the strategies, your go-to tactics for ensuring your messages are clear and calmly delivered under pressure?
Well, these are all things that can be decided ahead of time. And good communication leaders have an entire, file folder that is made of holding statements and message sets and, draft internal emails and all of these. So communication needs to be clear, needs to be concise, needs to be accurate and truthful. And then it absolutely you need to be able to understand what you can talk about and what you can't. And that's an understanding that, everybody has a number of potential crises that they can think of. Every industry has very specific industry crises. So if you understand your business, and that's something that I'd say to a lot of communicators, make sure you understand the business of the company. And you can put together so many potential scenarios that you can get approved and you can get ready to go that only need a couple different details put in there. Also, make friends with the lawyers, because in a crisis, lawyers and communicators always have to work together, and make sure that they understand what you do. And if the decision is, or if the best interest is not to communicate, you're not going to communicate. You're not like compelled to completely give away the whole store of information just because you have the opportunity. And I think that there's a lot of miscommunication between silos in organizations.
Yes. Yep.
So build those relationships, build your holding statements, figure out who your spokesperson is.
Yep. Yeah. I really love that. Figure out ahead of time what you can communicate. Like what can we share? And like, what is proprietary? What needs to stay just in-house?
Right. Well, and a good example of that is ransomware. So most companies have ransomware insurance.
Yeah.
Does everybody know what that ransomware insurance says?
Yeah.
Does the ransomware insurance prevent you from talking? Do you have to talk? Like, what are the parameters around that? Those are things you can find out beforehand.
And you should, right?
Right. And you should be prepared.
Yeah.
And like any of your big divisions within your organization, figure out what you need to know about them and what they need to know about you. So building those internal relationships.
Yeah.
I think the part that is so interesting to me about communications in crisis is once you get to the point of communicating, it's not particularly, unique.
Yeah.
You figured out who your stakeholders are. You figured out the best way to communicate with them. You know that the information you have is right because you've built the internal relationships.
Yeah.
And then you're just ready to communicate. And I think something that's really important for folks is that, and I think it's both for us as communicators to understand, as well as our internal partners, is that the news media isn't always our number one constituency. And so if you need to make sure that the people that matter most to you are getting the information from you, and figure out how that's supposed to, and don't get me wrong, I have a deep love of reporters, and what they do is it's very important, and they're doing it with fewer and fewer resources. And I think that's something to understand, is that if you are going to speak to the media, you need to figure out who you're dealing with and what they're dealing with. And it's not, I think so many folks are conditioned to I'm going to hold a press conference and I'm going to do this. That very well may not be your best strategy.
Yeah.
Figure out and also you have to figure out the strength of your spokesperson. A lot of times in a crisis, it should be your CEO. Leadership matters. But if that CEO is terrible and gruff, and you better get him or her media training.
Yeah.
And you better understand the right format for them.
Yes.
And so I think as communicators, there's the things that we are very good at. Then there's the things that we need to work on, building relationships, making the plans, executing the plans. Those are things that make for good communications.
Exactly. I always think especially when a term comes to crisis, I like to think of the work. It should be like dominoes, like everything is already lined up, and hopefully we can just stare at them and they look beautiful. But the day the crisis happens, we hit the one and it's already set. We're ready.
Well, this is what I mean by when we talk about trust. You
Mm-hmm.
trust that all those dominoes are in line,
Mm-hmm.
and that when you flick the first one, you know
Yep.
what's going to happen. There's no
Yes.
mystery what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yep.
And that makes for a really bad day
Mm-hmm.
to be less bad.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And not worse, right?
Absolutely.
Because that has
And
certainly
shorter
happened.
and not longer.
Yeah, exactly. So let's think about all of your political experience. So you know that you have experience in both American and Canadian political landscapes. And I'm wondering if you can share with us some of these lessons you learned, probably about resiliency and adaptability that you use or that maybe you coach other leaders to use and apply in their own organizations.
Well, for me, it's always been understanding what you stand for when you
Mm-hmm.
are a political leader, because there are going to be lots of people wanting things from you, and you're going to be wanting to
Mm-hmm.
serve a lot of different constituencies. And I think political leaders owe it to themselves as well as to the
Mm-hmm.
people that support them to be honest and transparent on who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and then letting people make a decision
Mm-hmm.
for who they are.
Yep.
um, I'm trying to think through. um, there's a I keep thinking back to this. I was very, very young. I hadn't even officially graduated from college yet when I was on a
Mm-hmm.
federal election campaign in Canada. And there's this woman, and I admit I've lost track of her. Her name is
Mm-hmm.
Leslie Thompson, and she was the head of communications for the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Canada.
Okay.
Very prominent
Mm-hmm.
fella. But unlike the United States, they have to run for election. So
Oh.
first and foremost, they are members of parliament, and then
Mm-hmm.
certain members of parliament are elevated to cabinet. So just like everybody else, Mr. Axworthy had to run for re-election,
Yeah.
and him being so prominent that our campaign got a lot of attention, a lot of media,
Mm-hmm.
and we were supposed to have a town hall at a senior center.
Mm-hmm.
And we got word about 20 minutes before anybody got there that 7 seniors were showing up. A
Oh.
room set for 200. And I don't know what, I guess it was raining or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep.
And I remember, and I was
7.
like, just a
Oh,
like deer in
yeah.
headlights. And Leslie looked at me and she goes, "What are we doing today?" And I thought, lady, like in my mind, I thought, lady, are you on like drugs? Like, what do you mean? She goes,
Yeah.
and I'm like, well, we're having a town hall. She's like, no, we're not. We're having a round table.
Mm.
And
Yep.
she's like, listen, she's like, there's a table in the back of the room that we were going to use for sign in. Bring that up
Mm-hmm.
here, put 10, 12 chairs around a table.
Yep.
We're having a round table.
Love it.
And it was that moment of
Yeah.
just leadership that she had to save
Mm-hmm.
this. And I've never, obviously, all these years later, I've
Yep.
never forgotten
Yep.
it, never forgotten her name.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a moment for me of, okay, there's no
Mm-hmm.
defeat
Yep.
in this. You have to figure out how to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that campaign was just so absolutely impactful for me because I remember so many other issues as I'd gotten to do Prime Minister's advance, so an advance team for
Wow.
the leader.
Yeah.
And it was my first event.
Yeah.
And I got to staff the first lady and her daughter, and I was
Mm.
21 years old and super
Mm-hmm.
green. And their daughter grabbed me by the arm. She said, "You want to be a journalist? Let's get out there." And so we went out, and
Wow.
I was watching the scrum with the prime minister,
Mm.
as Prime Minister Chrétien, and I cannot remember this man's name, but they didn't have kind of like a little podium for him to stand
Mm.
up, like
Mm-hmm.
not much. I think it was he would have needed like a foot or two, but the media were just pressing in, and so it would
Mm.
have looked very,
Oh, yeah.
um, kind of in almost like interrogatory, right? Like,
Yeah.
and his head of advance pushed his way to the front, and about 3 feet back from the prime minister, he sat down on the floor. This man in this like
Oh,
$500
yeah.
suit, just
Yep.
sat down cross-legged in front of the prime minister, and it pushed the media back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these lessons from these just
Yep.
pros, just and that's the adaptability that I think folks need.
Yeah.
You need to be
Yep.
able to understand the situation and what you need out of it
Yep.
and
Yep.
figure out what to do to make it happen. I've never forgotten those lessons. One of the things that I love to do is I love to be a mentor and a support for folks coming up in the industry. And those are the things that I tell people. You've got to go
Yeah.
do volunteer. You've got to go do things
Yep.
that scare you, that are frenetic, that
Yep.
go figure out how to adapt to all these things. And it's a lot of fun and so many good skills.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so incredible. And I think that shows you the power of communication. Because I think a lot of people think it's just my verbals. You're
Mm.
like, nope, that was a very clear nonverbal when that gentleman sat down and literally took up that space to be like,
Yep.
nope, we're stopping here. And I love too in that story of being like, we're having a round table, even the sass to like be able to say, what are we doing today? Like to play a little bit with it.
Mhm.
And you recognize that when you are leaning into these adaptability muscles and these resilience muscles, a lot of confidence, I think, stems from that competence.
Yes.
And that is really, really incredible.
Well, and it gives you experience, and that's if anyone has any political inkling, even if you don't make a career out of it, I highly recommend working on a campaign. The people are deeply entertaining. You also really learn how to make do with very little, and to be able to be exposed to that when you're young is important. And given that communication is so dramatically important to politics, you really don't find a lot of better communicators than those that come out of politics.
Yeah.
And so go figure out how they do what they do. And I think
Mhm.
another interesting angle for communicators in politics is communicators are so well respected. It's
Mhm.
such an important function
Mhm.
in a political
Yep.
office. Uh, Go figure out what that feels like. Go learn from
Yeah.
people that know what that feels like.
Yes. I love that. So, really closely related to your work in politics, but beyond that as well, let's think about reputation. So, you
Mhm,
know that reputation is often at stake, especially during a crisis.
mhm.
And I'm wondering what are some kind of proactive steps that leaders can take ahead of time to safeguard their reputation or their organization's reputation. So when a crisis hits, you know, maybe that hit isn't quite so deep.
Do all the things that I've already talked about. There are no crises in an organization that don't have a reputational impact.
Mhm.
And something that a lot of business leaders don't understand is that brand is what you own. Your reputation is what people say about you. It's
Mm,
what your stakeholders
I
own.
like that.
And so as you think about how you safeguard your reputation, which let's just be honest, Leah, is now about 35% of your organizational value.
Wow.
Like think about that. Something
Yes.
intangible
Yeah.
and delicate is
Mhm.
35% of your organization's value. Some people
Mhm.
it's even higher. Someone's probably a little lower,
Yeah.
but it's valuable.
Mhm.
And so as people think about what they need to do for a reputation, it's understanding those stakeholders. It's building that trust with your stakeholders. So when the
Mhm.
time comes, because they are the people that hold your reputation.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting recent examples of that, do you remember maybe like 6 months ago, there was a little kerfluffle about a Five Guys receipt going around social media?
Oh. Mhm.
Because like a hamburger and it was like $23.
Yes.
Five Guys said nothing. Do you remember this? They said absolutely nothing.
Yes.
They're like,
Yep.
okay. It's because they knew their customers, they know how much they're paying.
Mhm.
It,
Yep.
it wasn't a surprise to them,
Mhm.
but they still keep coming back.
Yep.
And so that understanding of your reputation is really important. And there's a lot of recent examples of not understanding who your audience is. And I think there's some very complicated ones. Folks talk a lot about the Bud Light issue. I think that one's very complicated. Because you do have a lot of different constituencies, and in a lot of cases, those constituencies are very counter to each other. And so that one's very, very, very complicated. And do I think they handled it right? Not really. But that's because they didn't put the effort in to understand what was going on. But it's a complicated one. But there's some other really good ones. Costco, there was recently a big food recall. And Costco knew everyone that bought it, and they called them.
Oh, that's incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
That's values.
Yep.
That's constituency. And then those people talk to other people. And so, and then they give them the benefit of the doubt. They knew that Costco would probably do something important like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And so all of these things that we talk about, building this infrastructure to is reputation resiliency.
Yeah.
And your reputation, and I think that if folks take anything away from what I said today, is reputation is not owned by you. It is owned by your stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. I've never thought about it that way. And you said that, like a light bulb moment. It's total sense. But yeah, I think you're right. Until someone kind of points that out, it's like, yes.
Absolutely.
So let's continue this idea of kind of getting ready and crisis proofing as much as we can, and thinking about this at the team level in organizations. So I'm wondering if you could share some insights on how leaders can cultivate this culture within their teams where they are inherently resilient and prepared to face, any unexpected challenge.
The two big things would be that it has to come from the top down. They have to fund it. They have to prioritize it. And the actionable item is create a core crisis team. And everybody on that team has to have one of two skills. The best team members have two. They have to have a subject matter knowledge, and they have to have ability to make decisions. I've never put together a core crisis team that didn't have a communicator, the head communicator, the lawyer, and probably HR, I would say, or IT, depending on what kind of company it is. So, but definitely the communicator and the lawyer. And it shouldn't be more than 8 to 10 people. And your company culture dictates if the CEO or leaders in the team, because sometimes we worked with a college that had their president was an 800-pound gorilla. And if she were in the room, the team their goal was to please her, not give her good information. And so we worked out a way where the team came up with 2 recommendations, and then there were 2 people designated to go present them to her, and she could decide what they were. But they got to deliberate. They got to have their best expert recommendation without that thumb on the scale. And the leadership is also critically important. We did a simulation with a global company, and the CEO of the company, they're like in 17 countries. Was the first person there every day.
That's incredible.
Then you kind of I think he really knew his team because, he would get there a little bit earlier and everyone would try to beat him. And what he needed to do, but that was because he prioritized it. He really understood what needed to happen. And that sort of leadership is invaluable. And it also means it gives people the confidence that you take the resiliency of your company, the resiliency of your reputation seriously when you invest in protecting it. And that's a vote of confidence for the company. And people like comfort.
Oh, yeah.
They like to know that somebody is caring what's happening, that they're investing in helping people figure out what they need to do to row the boat with them. That
Exactly.
those kind of investments are really important for a multitude of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, I love that you bring so much of leader values and organizational values, and help people identify those if they haven't quite spelled them out.
Mhm.
Because with time, when you're living those values, then you have better retention, right? Because you have the folks who self-identify, and then the people are like, this doesn't quite align with mine. That's fine. Then they can self-select out.
Absolutely.
Um, but we're seeing too, and you're talking about building these teams that are inherently resilient, and the modeling, how it shows up that way as well. I really
Mhm.
love that. All right, let's talk about blind spots, like these vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
So, in your experience, what are some common vulnerabilities that are often overlooked? Either leaders overlook these or organizations. And what are some of your tips for kind of maybe spotting these before it's too late?
Well, the biggest one we see is absolutely is the head in the sand, and never going to happen to me. Um, we have a couple of different tools that we have that give
Mm-hmm.
folks empirical information to take
Mm-hmm.
to leaders to try and shake them out.
Okay.
Um, that is what's the word I'm looking for? Um, that's really the biggest blind spot that we see.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's other leaders that are, well, this doesn't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
And those, they tend to require very analytical approaches to be
Yeah.
able to deal with them. So for instance, I spoke at a conference this past fall, and we talked about the ramifications on your financial infrastructure of a reputational
Mm-hmm.
crisis. There are, if your reputation is damaged, your
Yeah.
customers go away. Your
Mm-hmm.
supply chain may not want to do business with you. So that those are both economic shortfalls.
Yeah.
If it's something that requires insurance, do
Mm-hmm.
you have enough
Mm-hmm.
reserves to be able to cover what in between when the incident happens and when the insurance pays out?
Yeah.
Do you have enough reserves? And when you start talking to people about it that way, light bulbs really start to go off of, oh, wait, this isn't just to, I'm going to show my age here and quote Bridget Jones. This isn't just somebody fannying around with a press release.
Yeah.
There are
I
real
love it.
business
Yeah.
ramifications.
Yeah.
And when people understand that I think one of the reasons that I don't do a lot of speaking to communicators is because by
Mm-hmm.
and large, communicators get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My evangelism comes into the other parts of the business, the CEO, the CFO, the chief legal counsel. Those are the folks that I want to talk to make sure that they
Mm-hmm.
talk to their communicator, at the very least go and meet them and figure out what's keeping them
Mm-hmm.
up at night.
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
and respect the function, I think, is another thing
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to yell about.
Yeah. 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 I think you're right in helping people to recognize that even if you think this isn't going to impact you, this is interdependent. If this
Absolutely.
organization is not thriving, you personally and your team will not be thriving. So,
Yes. Well, a good example of that, I actually wrote about this, was the Silicon
mhm.
Valley Bank.
Okay.
I I did not talk about the
Mhm.
financial side of it. I am not a CFO.
Mhm.
I am not don't work for the SEC. But one thing that was critically missing in that whole situation is they didn't have a senior communications person in the bank.
Mm,
Hands down, period, didn't. And a large part of what drove their problem was the way the CEO was communicating.
mhm.
And if there had been a communications person sitting in that
Yeah.
room saying, you can't say everything's going to be okay, because people automatically assume that it's not right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And those kinds of blind spots on who can contribute and who can help you mitigate and spot,
Mhm.
I think are fatal sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And great example to bring up. Watching that one play out was pretty painful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit and think about advocacy and social movements. And I know you've been involved in a lot of efforts this way, like I am ALS and the Force to End Harassment and Advocacy. And Stephanie, I was hoping you could share kind of how social movements influence your approach to crisis management and reputation repair.
Well, this all comes back to values
Mm-hmm.
and living your values.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all sorts of values across the spectrum in organizations. If you are an advocacy organization, you wear your values in your name.
Yes.
If you were a business, you either don't have a perspective or you do have a perspective. So, Hobby Lobby, for
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows kind of what Hobby Lobby stands for. And so they understand also how they are going to react to social movements. And
Mm-hmm.
this again comes back to knowing who your constituents are. Ben and Jerry's, before they were sold, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Understood who their constituents were. And so they lived their values in their company. So they understood kind of the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
For companies that don't, they have to go back to those, they have to do the values
Yeah.
exercise. They have to
Mm-hmm.
do the stakeholder exercise because that gives you clarity in if,
Mm-hmm.
how, and when you will engage in a social movement.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I would highly recommend, if you are an organization that does business in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
can you be part of a trade association?
Yep.
Do you need government relations?
Mm-hmm.
Because given the highly interconnected communications in this
Yeah.
world,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody takes issue with what you're doing and you don't have an understanding of the landscape and you don't understand what you stand for, you are
Yeah.
going to be floating in the middle of an ocean.
Yeah.
You need that
Exactly.
touchstone for when an issue
Mm-hmm.
comes knocking. One of the guidances we sent out to CEOs after a
Mm-hmm.
year after January 6th was, did you make promises last year? Where are they?
Yeah.
And we are very we make it a habit to not work on day-to-day politics in our firm. All of us
Mm-hmm.
come out of politics, but we don't work in politics.
Yeah.
Um, because we understand that there are different approaches, and it makes us better to work with people we don't always agree with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
and so it becomes a really good exercise for us to help people work
Yeah.
through. But we want people to work through them, because if you do not have, again, if you do not have that touchstone, when
Yeah.
somebody comes knocking, you're not going to know what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
the other part of it is to make sure it's congruent throughout your organization.
Yeah.
If you say you believe X, it better be throughout
Mm-hmm.
the entire organization.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks have, a lot of people that do political giving, a lot of the bigger companies that do
Mm-hmm.
political giving, they're very much, um, they're done for strategic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding how those strategic reasons tie into your reputation and to the people that you value
Yeah.
is important, because
Yeah.
nothing lives on an island anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me
Exactly.
personally, getting involved in helping start IMALS and
Yeah.
ending advocacy, ending
Yeah.
harassment and advocacy were two
Yeah.
very personal issues for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and so I think that um, I, as an example, very tragically, the actor Eric Dane was diagnosed with ALS
Mm-hmm.
the other week. And despite the fact that People magazine has had the founders of I Am ALS on the cover,
Mm-hmm.
the reporter went to the Muscular Dystrophy Association to quote about ALS,
Oh.
and they got a whole bunch of things wrong. And that is a perfect example. I deeply
Yes.
care about this.
Mm-hmm.
And now my impression of People magazine
Mm-hmm.
is completely off base.
Yep.
And so I think that that's, to me, understanding those values is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, exactly. And I like to, because I think so many organizations, and I do think this is shifting now with the political landscape, but so many are like, it was just this little bit of a homework assignment. Here's our mission statement. Here's our vision statement. Done.
Mhm.
And they leave it. But I love that idea of actually living it and being
You
able
have to.
to speak to it because you're embodying it.
Well, and something that you said just really struck me, which is, if people don't buy into it, they can just
Yeah,
move on,
exactly. Yeah,
right? If they don't like what you're
exactly.
selling,
Yeah, yep, yep.
just move
Because it's
on.
not good for them and it's not good for you, and we know what to do then, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, Stephanie, last two questions for you, and they're intertwined. And this is the
Okay.
way that we end all episodes of the Communicative Leader is, advice or a challenge or a tip for our titled leaders out there. And then the second part is, again, what is the pragmatic leadership or communication tip, advice, or challenge for employees of all ranks and across all industries?
Well, for those in the role,
Mm-hmm,
don't forget that you are vitally important to business.
mm-hmm,
There is nobody moves along, no one can sell anything if
mm-hmm,
they have communications. And the and to that is communications and marketing are not the same thing.
mm-hmm,
And if I had my way,
mm-hmm.
marketing would always report to communications.
Yeah, I love it.
And I'm sorry, Leah, I was
Mhm.
thinking about that. What was the second question?
Well, and the second one is just for all employees. So if we have some folks, I think especially after COVID, a lot of folks are like, I don't want the stress with the titled position,
Mhm.
but self leadership and growing as people. So those folks who are not in a title leadership position, any different rank, what advice, challenge, or tip do you want to leave them with?
Uh, it never hurts to make friends outside your circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps you as a professional, that helps you as a person, and it helps you and it helps your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Because learning about what other people do and creating those relationships, like I said, I'm a collector of people because I
Yes. Yeah.
love people. I find them
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. I find them interesting. And just go meet other people in your organizations because it will make your experience better and it will make your
Mm-hmm.
industry better.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And it's something, you're right, that for many of us, it's not the natural inclination, but it's a game changer and a really important one.
Absolutely.
Well, Stephanie, thank you for sharing your expertise with us, your time. I've learned so much in this interview. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know our listeners will as well.
Leah, it's been my absolute pleasure. And anytime you want to chat again, I would love to do it.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.